Do you need out? Here, go. Go join your brother. Oh my gosh. Hi. My cat was stuck in the office. It's like clawing his way out the door. Okay. Lovely. All right. Yeah, I'm a little bit later to the meeting. I couldn't find my own Zoom link. I had to go to Canvas and get it, because it's not on my actual Zoom platform, which is very silly. But I think we're okay now. All right. Welcome. Happy Tuesday. How are you guys doing today? Good? Bad? Good? Excellent. I like the digital backgrounds that some of you have. It's always fun to see those. Madison is flying right now. Sitting perched atop a fluffy cloud. Anna's fighting the French Revolution or something.
Actually, it's a book, but
Fair enough. Cool. Well, it's good to see some of you. It's good to see half of you. The other half that I can't see, I'm glad you're here as well. Very excited. So my plans I envisioned us doing like some kind of like Civil War history 101 honors, like Civil War, like put you guys in different rooms and do like roll digital dice and do like a battle. But with that was my idea, but Zoom doesn't allow, the subscription that I have doesn't allow for breakout rooms. It also doesn't allow for me to program in like a dice rolling thing. So the whole thing the whole nascent idea kind of went to pot before I could really even get it off the ground. So unfortunately, it's just kind of talking today. But that's okay, because we have some cool things to talk about. And next Friday, we will be doing our first kind of mini game. It's just like a one-off in-class game. And so I'm in the process of building the Discord platform for that. Yeah, so more information on that. So we will be doing some cool game related stuff next week when we get to the Greeks. It's going to be very cool. All right, so I see most of you guys are here. What I'm going to be doing is just give, like, basically today is an informational rundown on sort of the topic. I want to especially discuss, we're doing kind of a greatest hits of like ancient civilizations today before the Greeks come along. Like really, a lot of what we're talking about this week is setting up ancient Greece, and you guys are probably familiar with, you're more familiar with ancient Greece, the myths and the gods and Percy Jackson and Troy and all that good stuff, than this stuff. So I kind of want to do an overview to just get us to the Greeks, and also talk a little bit about the Iron Age. So today is a little bit more informational. It's more kind of lecture-y, I guess, than what I would otherwise like to do, because my original plans got scrapped. So just bear with me. And then when we're done with this, I'm going to open it up to any questions. If you guys have any questions about the first essay assignment that's due at the end of this week, I'm happy to field any questions or go over that with you guys. Okay, so that's the plan for today. Let me get my screen share on here. So real quick, I want to just, talk a little bit about, and this is mostly reinforcing what you're to read in the textbook pages for last week and this week. And I just want to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to Egypt, like basically just pull out the most important pieces of Egypt, and then also talk about the rest of the Bronze Age. So, as you guys read about last week, we have this kind of like prehistoric period where there's the what we call the Stone Age, the Neolithic period, where people first start to learn how to farm soil and grow crops and like build tools to use and settle down in permanent places for more than just a couple of weeks. Um, this basically is the start of civilization, right? We call this first wave civilizations. Um, Egypt is the most important one of these simply because the amount of things these guys are able to do is insane compared to what came before Egypt and honestly what's come since Egypt. The pyramids of Giza are still a wonder of the world because it's absolutely bonkers what these guys were able to accomplish as a society. So I want to emphasize just a second that ancient Egypt is one of these examples that we definitely should be talking about in our essay related to like ancient godhood. The old kingdom of Egypt coalesces around uh, kings, and kings are nothing new by this point. But what's interesting is these kings, and they're called pharaohs, obviously, are regarded as gods among men. And so the pharaoh is kind of an agent of the old gods in Egypt, and he's kind of like a demigod, I guess, right? If you've seen Moana, like they're like the Maui, Dwayne the Rock Johnsons of ancient Egypt. And you guys are, I'm sorry if I'm insulting your intelligence because you know all about the pharaohs, but as it relates especially to talking about like ancient godhood, these people were all powerful in the minds of their subjects. Um, so much so that they undertake massive building projects. Your textbook talks a lot about, the ziggurats and the pyramids as kind of being these permanent monuments to the dead gods. The step pyramids being like the first one. And then finally, we get the Giza pyramids, which is what we see here. They're the more recognizable ones that are absolutely huge. The Great Sphinx. All of this kind of comes out of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Now, you don't need to necessarily know, the dates and all this stuff. I'm not interested in quizzing you guys or testing you guys on like the dates for these big building projects. I just simply want to give you the impression that this is the beginning of kind of this ancient period where men are regarded as gods, and they start to think of the gods as among us, even in these ancient civilizations. Papyrus is the big invention to come out of Egypt that the rest of the ancient world uses. This is their main export. Kind of like, Detroit used to be the main export of cars back in the day. Cleveland, the city of Cleveland's main export is crippling depression right now, especially when it comes to their sports teams. The Emirates exports oil. Egypt exports papyrus, which is this kind of early form of paper, right? And this is how we start to get a lot of written records from this period. Is we do get papyrus scraps still that are preserved today that talk about, usually just boring stuff like trade agreements between regions, or like I traded this much oil for this much fish and things like that. But it's still important because this is the beginning of written records that aren't just like scratches on a cave wall or hieroglyphics carved into the sides of pyramids. The Middle Kingdom, there's this period of kind of civil war in Egypt, and 100 years after the fall of the Old Kingdom, we get the Middle Kingdom. The pharaohs are reestablished as kind of these godhead figures. So you kind of see patterns kind of of kings being regarded as gods or demigods, and then those ideas are replaced by something other than that. One of your perspectives from the past documents that you're reading for this week is the hymn to Atum, and it's talking about a god that's greater than the pharaoh. Like the pharaoh is like just a little itty bitty ant compared to the sun god. This is a very important document when it comes to talking about religious belief as being something that is starting to become more universal in terms of looking at these big, great gods that have absolute control and dominion over the earth. This is something that continues on as we talk about the Greeks and the Romans and really and the Hebrews and things like that. The part where I kind of deviate from the textbook a little bit here, and this is why I'm talking about this, is I don't think the book does a very good job of talking about the Mediterranean world in the ancient period. We think of maybe like globalism as being a very modern thing that came with the rise of like telephones and airplanes and stuff. The idea that global regions have been interacting with each other and trading with one another is as old as ancient Egypt. Basically, you have Egypt being the most powerful centralized kingdom of the old ancient period, but they had trade networks and trade agreements with kings in places like Syria, Judea, what later becomes known as Greece, you know. So the Mediterranean Sea is kind of where our home base is going to be for, I'd say, most of the rest of this class. Because we're going to be talking about the Mediterranean world as kind of the Mediterranean Sea is a highway of trade and contact between civilizations. And we start to see the rise of military outposts, forts. We see wars between these civilizations start to occur on a grand scale, which we'll talk about more in just a minute. Alliances start to form. You know, Egypt forms alliances with new civilizations in Mesopotamia and Asia Minor, modern day Turkey, things like that. So these are all very important developments. We start to see the rise of kind of the granddaddies of ancient Greece. They're called the Mycenaeans, or Mycenaeans rather. And these are people who perfect building ships and know how to really go about the Mediterranean in a fast and efficient way. This is a seafaring and settling civilization, the Mycenaeans, and they are the precursors to modern Greece in a number of ways. They set up, this is your college word for the day, a thalassocracy, which is essentially a sea-based empire. Which isn't to say there's like an ancient Greek like emperor that lords over like a centralized government, like Emperor Palpatine or something, but you have a very tightly knit international trade or like network that connects all the different kind of Greek islands with trading with Asia Minor, trading with Egypt. All this is happening at the same time. Hello, Castle. I'm glad you're here. No worries. They believe also in this kind of rising pantheon of gods that we know and love so much from our Percy Jackson books or whatever. You know, gods like Zeus and Poseidon and Dionysus. All of these gods are kind of born out of this pre-classical period of Mycenaean Greece. So keep an eye on these guys because they'll come into play next week, and they really are the forerunners to Greeks from the classical era, and the classical era meaning like by the time the Iron Age is well and established in the Mediterranean. We'll talk more about the Iron Age in just a minute. But first, I promised you guys some kind of battle or some kind of epic war today And this is something your book skimps on a little bit, which I think is unfortunate. Have you guys ever heard of the Sea Peoples before? Like, has this ever crossed your radar in social studies classes or anything else? Like, have you ever come across this before? If not, that's totally understandable. Um, this is one of the crazy, like if I could build a time machine and go back to any period ever, it'd probably be this one. Because partly is it was so important. It made such a big impact on Western civilization and kind of the world as we know it. And also we just don't have that much information about what actually happened. But basically it was Armageddon for this kind of highway of trade and this like network of globalization that happened in the early Mediterranean world. All of that came to a sudden end with the arrival of the Sea Peoples. It's this great mystery of history. Ooh, that rhymes. This great mystery where we don't actually know what happened, but it was monumentally impactful on what happens. All we know is that these folks came out of nowhere. We don't know really where they came from. Perhaps the northern Mediterranean, perhaps the western Mediterranean, but they were a seafaring people that were just as skilled with boats and ships and getting around as the Mycenaeans, the kind of forerunners to Greece, but they're not the same thing. They're a completely different civilization, and they come out of nowhere and they invade most of the civilizations that we've been reading about or talking about up until now. They destroy large parts of the Mycenaean thalassocracy, kind of empire, sea-based empire. They invade and destroy northern and eastern Mediterranean civilizations. And they even, so far as single-handedly end the Bronze Age. Like this is where we end the Bronze Age in our recounting of history, is this arrival of this mysterious group of nomadic people who declare war on everybody and burn everything down. It shuts off this global trade that starts to happen in the Mediterranean, really just as it begins to take off. They get so far as the Egyptians. They invade ancient Egypt, like the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. They invade them. And one of the big pieces of evidence that we know about that tells us about the Sea Peoples is this picture that you see right here in the PowerPoint. Like this is an Egyptian portrayal of a great battle under one of the pharaohs, Ramses III, where he leads an army on the shores of Egypt against the Sea Peoples and narrowly defeats them, thereby saving his kingdom. But that's like it. That's all we know. It's crazy town. It's absolutely bonkers that we don't know much about what happened, other than the Egyptians fought them and defeated them barely. But they burned down like basically the rest of the neighborhood besides Egypt. It's actually pretty wild. And your book talks about this a little bit, but I wanted to just stress the importance that this is the end of the Bronze Age, and we get something completely new. Any questions so far? I know I'm kind of being sort of lectury today, and I don't really like to do that, but everybody tracking so far? Okay, cool. I just like to check in every so often, make sure you guys can hear me and see things. The last slide I'm going to talk about in this section, that we're going to move on and talk about the Iron Age, is the Phoenicians. One of the sort of splinter groups of the Sea Peoples that kind of breaks away and form more of like a peaceful, permanent society is the Phoenicians. These guys are just as skilled in seacraft and trading as the Mycenaeans and the Sea Peoples that came before them. They settle all throughout kind of the Eastern Mediterranean. and they start to colonize the Mediterranean as well from the period 1200 to 800 BC. They don't have a centralized king, but they are kind of an oligarchy where they have like lots of important families that are running the show. Mostly merchant families, so sort of the richest, and the ones that own the ships and things like that. They run the Phoenician civilization, and their big contribution, and this is going to come up a couple different times, is the alphabet. Right? They give Western civilization the gift of a unified, kind of codified alphabet for the first time. Instead of using hieroglyphics and memorizing thousands of different little picture symbols to communicate in writing, like the Egyptians did, the Phoenicians come up with letters that mimic the sounds we make with our mouths, right? And use that to communicate in a much more efficient way. So you can combine letters together to form words. And those words are the very words that we're speaking right now, instead of memorizing like the symbol for bear. And if you want to differentiate bear from like black bear and brown bear, you have to have different symbols for that, right? No more. We've breached the efficiency barrier and created an alphabet. And this alphabet will go on to inform basically the rest of Western civilization. Obviously, we still use alphabets, but it started with the Phoenicians. We still have this root word phonics. If you're working on your phonics, you're working on your letters basically, and how it relates to sound comes from the root of Phoenician, right? Because they're the guys who invented it. So writing becomes much easier moving forward. This is why we're able to kind of form the second wave of civilization, is the alphabet and the Iron Age. And so I'm going to switch to Iron Age. I have a whole different thing on the Iron Age. And it's not very long, but I just want to talk about one of the more fascinating parts of ancient history. So this map is really cool. I'm going to share this map in like a JPEG form or something with you on Canvas, because it's way, way cool. I found this the other day. This is the world in 2000 BC, or BCE if you want to be modernist and politically correct. But basically, all the yellow parts of the map are Stone Age, like hunting gathering, right? So vast parts of Siberia, Australia. Australia is kind of in the Stone Age, really, until British people come along and steal all the land from Aborigines. A lot of sub-Saharan Africa, the Americas, large parts of that are hunter-gatherers. Now things get interesting when we get into like the green. So we start to see simple farming societies, people who are able to use agriculture to build the building blocks of civilization, right? And that's more parts like Western China, Indochina, which is now, Southeast Asia, India, Western Europe. Western Europe is still very like basic agricultural until the Romans come along. Central America, everything in purple is kind of nomadic, pastoralists. But then we get into the really kind of interesting stuff, which is the orange and blue, complex farming societies and state societies. And the kind of Mediterranean, broader sort of Middle Eastern area we're looking at, that's encircled by this red line, is where people have developed bronze as an advanced tool. And this enables them to pursue agriculture on a vast scale. This allows them to equip armies with sophisticated weapons like shields and spears and bronze swords. And by the way, that's happening over here in China as well. So like China and Western civilization that we're concerned about in this class are developing in parallel. But we can see the rise of which kind of becomes Babylon, the Syrian city-states, and also Egypt. These places have advanced to centralized states where bronze is like the main tool of doing things. And this kind of separates, how do I get out of here? First wave civilizations from what comes after. So first wave is the transition from Stone Age civilizations to basic farming. Okay, that's as basic as you can get when we talk about civilization. We develop pottery, vessels to store excess food, which allows us to do other things with our time. We can always eat a sandwich later on. We don't have to eat the grain as we as we harvest it and make it. That allows us to pursue other things like writing down stuff. Early forms of writing and record keeping come from first wave civilizations like Egypt and the Mycenaeans. We get permanent dwellings and temples, right? Bronze tools and weapons. These are all aspects of first wave civilizations. And that is kind of what we've been reading about up until this point. So if you're looking for a nice summary of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, these kind of civilizations to break out of the Stone Age and develop, we can refer to those as first wave. Things get really cool and really interesting. This is where we're going to spend a lot of our time with second wave civilization. So roughly 800 BC to the collapse of the Roman Empire, essentially, and early feudalism. We still have everything from the first wave: the alphabet, pottery, permanent dwellings, all that stuff. But there's sustained contact with other people around the world, around the region, and in fact around the world. And this can take the form of trade, oftentimes war, or migration. We'll talk about all of those things in the coming weeks. We get advanced forms of government, so very sophisticated kingdoms. We get actual empires start to arise with the systematic conquest of neighboring territories. That's basically what an empire is. And we get written laws. So we talk a little bit about the Code of Hammurabi. That's kind of like a first wave iteration of what we're talking about as being the norm going forward. It's like laws are written down in books for people to reference all the time. And we have sophisticated legal systems based on these laws. And then we finally get iron tools and weapons that replace bronze. And this is one of the more important things that's just kind of assumed in history classes. All of a sudden we started using more efficient tools. It's forced out of necessity because the sea peoples come about and they burn everything down. And so people have to start developing ways of using resources that they have in their neighborhoods because they cannot get the necessary required minerals to make bronze. Now, I want to back up just a second. I don't know if you guys know this, but bronze is it's a combination of two different elements, copper and tin. You need both of those raw materials to make bronze. Now, back before the Sea Peoples happened, there was an extensive trade network around the Mediterranean where people who had copper but didn't have tin, they could trade for it, and they could get both elements and they could smelt those together and make bronze, or vice versa. Copper is all over the place. Tin is not. Tin is not a very plentiful resource in the Mediterranean area. So that requires some kind of global trade, right, to get both elements so you can make bronze implements. The great thing about iron is that you only need iron to make it. You just have to heat up the iron to a higher temperature than what it takes to make bronze. So the nice thing about bronze is even though you need two elements to synthesize it and make it, we call this an alloy, right? Bronze is an alloy, but it requires a much less hot, like forge, to smelt both of these materials and make this alloy. With iron, all you need to do is heat it up to a higher temperature, about 500 degrees hotter, which means you need a very specialized forge to heat iron. But once people realize you can just heat up iron and make better tools, then this becomes the new norm. We've entered the iron age when people just use iron lying around and they heat it up to really, really hot temperatures, and then they can make spear tips or they can make plows. The Mediterranean does this. Civilizations start to do this after the sea peoples come along and destroy the trade networks of ancient yore. So we enter the Iron Age when people are forced out of necessity to learn how to smelt iron. And during this time period, we also get the first steel alloys as well, which is simply iron and introducing a little bit of carbon into it. Like you kind of oxygenate, and then and you have to heat iron a couple different times. It requires much more hot temperatures, like something like 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, to make steel. So it's really hard to do in the ancient period, but people were doing it. People were making steel. I think we think of steel like we think of like the Industrial Revolution as being like the advent of steel. People have been making steel for actually thousands of years. If you've ever seen Damascus steel before, like you should Google Damascus steel. It's this beautiful kind of like rippled pattern of steel. You can buy like Damascus steel knives today from, Bed Bath and Beyond or whatever. And it looks really cool, but it's like this very flawed form of steel because it's like the earliest form of it, and they were making it in the ancient period. But anyway, steel is awesome because it's super light, it's super durable, it holds an edge much better than iron or definitely bronze. It's rust resistant. You could leave it out in the rain, and it will not rust very quickly at all. And it makes for excellent weaponry because it can cut right through any kind of bronze shielding or something that an enemy deploys against you. And steel is super present in our daily lives. Like the beginning of the Iron Age and using iron implements introduced both iron and steel tools that we still use every day. Like go to your kitchen for lunch and pull out a fork, and it might say on the back like made from stainless steel, right? Iron and steel are everywhere today, but they were also starting to become everywhere thousands of years ago, which is what brings us into the Iron Age. And that's just something that's not emphasized very much in history classes or social studies classes. You guys in honors are getting the good uncut, grade A, top shelf quality history right here. So, the importance of the Iron Age and introducing iron into ancient civilizations is present in lots of different primary, like historical sources. Deuteronomy, the Bible mentions steel and iron both many times. Deuteronomy, for the Lord your God's bringing you to a good land, talking about the promised land of Judea and Israel, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. Like one of the great things about the Hebrews, which you're reading about in your textbook this week, one of the great things that they thought was great about their promised land that they believed Yahweh was giving them was that it's plentiful in resources. Like, look, we can mine copper and iron out of the hills in Israel. It talks about, being the land of milk and honey and all that, but there are sources from the Bible that are talking about, look how great this land is because it has iron, which demonstrates how important these resources are to advancing civilization. When we get to the Greeks, there's iron becomes a metaphor as being, the hardest material you can have. Hector talks to Achilles in the Iliad, says, for your heart and mind are truly iron. Like, look at this great warrior. He's basically made out of iron, which is the biggest compliment you could give someone is like, look, you're you're as tough as the hardest stuff we can come across right now. So what all I'm trying to basically give you guys is this impression that because the sea peoples came along and wrecked these ancient trade networks, Egypt had to become self-reliant. Babylon had to become self-reliant. The Hittites had to become self-reliant. The Mycenaeans, the Phoenicians, all of them had to rebuild. And in doing so, accidentally launched the Iron Age, where iron now becomes the most important resource, the most important tool going forward. And everything we talk about from here on out, we should just assume that the civilizations we're discussing know how to form iron and how to build iron implements. And this is one of the hallmarks of second wave civilizations that are way more advanced than the first. Last thing I want to share. We start to see the rise of empires thanks to iron, thanks to this extremely durable, reliable metal. People are able to literally forge empires on the back of this resource. So some of the second wave civilizations that we see leading up to the Greeks and beyond the Greeks, the only reason they're able to exist is because they've discovered how to make iron tools. The first is the Assyrians. They're extremely good at warfare. They are the northern neighbors of Babylon, and they end up conquering the entire Babylonian Empire. They conquer a lot more than that. They go west and conquer what becomes Israel and Judea, Syria, and eventually Egypt. They make it all the way down to Egypt, and they conquer the new kingdom of Egypt by the time we get to the 7th century BC. We get the Persian Empire after that. A lot more. We're going to talk a lot more about the Persian Empire next week when it comes to the Greeks. They basically conquer everything that the Assyrians had, plus modern day Iran, which is, that was ancient Persia, is the modern nation of Iran is basically Persia. I mean, their language, they speak Persian today in Iran. They don't speak Arabic, they speak Persian. Just like the Greeks still speak Greek in Greece. But they conquer everything from Western India all the way up to parts of modern day Greece, which we'll discuss next week. We get the Hellenistic Empire, which is Alexander the Great. Alexander combines new military techniques with iron tools and shields, especially shields. Like, shields are really big for Alexander. And he and his Macedonians, kind of northern Greeks, go on to conquer the Persian Empire. So they inherit everything that the Persians had built and conquered. And then we eventually get the Romans, who just kind of building on top. It's basically just turtles all the way down, right? It's empires that keep conquering each other and building on top of each other new forms of rule. But the Romans conquer everything in Italy. Eventually they conquer Greece, Northern Africa, most of what the Persians had. And they also do what was previously thought to be impossible, which is conquer the entire Mediterranean world. Like, there's not a single part of the Mediterranean that the Romans don't eventually control. We'll get there in due time, but all of this is possible because of the Iron Age, because we've entered the Iron Age now, where we have extremely durable tools and weapons that are much more accessible than bronze tools, and they're also better. So I will share all this stuff with you on Canvas. Like if you've missed anything, you know, I'm gonna make it all available to you on Canvas. I know that's a lot of information, and I'm sorry, I had to abandon my plans for doing something more interactive today. But we will get to the interactive stuff very soon. Any questions about any of that?
Am I remembering correctly? Were the Phoenicians the ones who invented the purple dye as well?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure insofar as like dyes. That's kind of hard. That's kind of hard to nail down because there is quite a bit of trade with ancient India, and they're also very good at manufacturing dyes and exporting them. So are the Egyptians, and so it's hard to nail down exactly when you get like, you know, textiles that have nice, beautiful colors to them. It might have been the Phoenicians. It might have come from earlier. I'm not certain. Yeah. Any other questions about the material or any like confusion there might be or clarification you need? Okay. I want to field any questions you might have about the writing assignment. Are there any like worries that you have about this, or Landon, is that background, is that Damascus steel that you found? Right on. Yeah, there it is.
It's for my wish list of knives that I want. So it was funny that you just brought up the knives and stuff.
That's fantastic. I'm getting into cooking. Like I know how to make cereal right now, but I eventually would like to be able to actually do like real cooking. And so I'm in the market for good knives as well. So that's actually funny. But yeah, that's Damascus steel. It's got that cool like ripple, like watery kind of pattern to it. That's the earliest form of steel because they couldn't quite figure out how to get all the impurities out of the steel. Anyway, are there any questions about the writing assignment? This first paper that you're doing. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about that. So if you haven't already, please look at Module 2 and check out all the resources there. You get some sample papers, like how to structure a paper that in the form that I'm looking for. But basically, you're going to be using, I love that this disappears on me because of the green screen, but the perspectives documents, the documents in here for last week and this week are going to be like your evidence that you use to answer the questions, right? Like you're going to be using firsthand historical documents to answer the questions that I pose to you in the assignment. And it talks to you about, you know, the divine, like how do the Egyptians and the Hebrews, like how do they experience God or the gods? And you could answer that any different ways by using the documents. And also how do ancient women fit into this picture as well? Those are your two questions, and you're just using the historical documents to answer those questions. And that's basically it. Like it's an exercise in using factual documented evidence to answer a question. Because I can't remember if I went on a rant in this class last week or it was a different one, but you can just go on you can go on the internet and just say something that's completely made up and people will believe it these days. You know, just look at what happened in the Capitol a couple weeks ago. It's an entire mob based on disinformation. And like, if we're going to fix Western civilization, if we're going to continue Western civilization into the future, past 2021, it needs to be because you guys and other educated people know how to use facts to back up what you're saying. It's a very important thing that's being lost right now, and that's terrifying. So that's the point of these assignments, is to use a basis of evidence to answer questions and then cite your sources. All right, cool. Yeah, we've got some documents we're going to discuss on Friday to answer any last minute questions you might have as you start, writing your essays. If you have any questions after we're done here, just send me an email, and I'll get back to you ASAP. Or you can hold them for Friday. I can field more questions for Friday as well. But Friday, we're going to be discussing the documents, and I'm also, hopefully by then, have some more information to share with you about next week in our Athens game, which I'm very excited to do. All right. Anything else before we go? Okay, great. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for bearing with me. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. I'll see you back here on Friday. All right.
See ya.
Bye.